I found a room by accident, or maybe it found me, it's hard to tell now. I was helping clear out an abandoned section of an old boarding house on the outskirts of town, a place no one had lived in for decades. It had been condemned years ago, but a friend of mine bought it cheap, hoping to turn it into apartments. I offered to help with the cleanup, not knowing what waited inside. The air inside was stale, heavy with mold and something metallic, the kind of scent that sits at the back of your throat like old blood. The wallpaper was peeling, the floorboards soft and warped. Every step groaned, as if the house didn't want us there. We'd cleared most of the rooms on the first floor when I noticed something strange at the end of a narrow hallway. There was a section of wall that didn't match the rest of the structure. The paint looked newer, smoother, as if it had been redone recently, which made no sense in a house untouched for decades. I ran my hand across the surface and felt a faint vibration beneath it. When I pressed harder, the wall gave way, a thin panel swinging inward to reveal darkness beyond. It wasn't a door, more like a hollow space that shouldn't have existed. We shone a flashlight inside, and the beam seemed to vanish, swallowed by the shadows. The air from inside was colder than the rest of the house, not the normal chill of a damp cellar, but something deeper, unnatural. It felt like the absence of warmth altogether. I stepped through and realized almost instantly that something was wrong with the shape of the space. The walls curved not outward, but inward in a way that disoriented the eyes. No corners, no edges. The surfaces seemed to flow together like melted wax, bending and twisting until it was impossible to tell where one side ended and another began. The light from my torch slipped and slid over them like water, unable to settle anywhere. The more I looked, the less sense it made. Every instinct told me to back out, but curiosity pinned me in place. I took a few steps inside, and the sound changed. It was subtle. At first, the echo of my movements became too sharp, too near, as though the space around me was shrinking without actually moving. I called out to my friend, but he didn't answer. I turned around, and the doorway was gone. There was just the wall, smooth, seamless. I pressed my hands against it, felt the cold surface and the faint tremor beneath, as if something was breathing inside the walls. Then the light flickered. My flashlight dimmed, and for a split second, I saw movement on the far side of the room, a ripple along the curved surface, like something large shifting just beneath it. I stumbled backward, my shoulder brushing the wall, and the sensation was wrong. It was soft for an instant, like flesh, before hardening again. When I blinked, the doorway was back as if nothing had happened. I didn't think. I just ran out, gasping for air. The cold clung to my skin long after I left that space, and I didn't tell my friend what I'd seen. He wouldn't have believed me anyway. But that night, when I tried to sleep, I dreamed of that room, the walls pulsing like a living thing, the air thick and breathing. And when I woke, I could still feel that faint vibration beneath my hands, like the heartbeat of something buried deep inside the house. And I couldn't shake the feeling that whatever I'd stepped into hadn't been empty at all, that it had been waiting quietly in the dark for someone to find it again. Part 2. The sound beneath the floor. For the next few days, I couldn't stop thinking about the room. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw its smooth, impossible walls curving in ways the mind couldn't follow. I tried convincing myself it was a trick of the light or a collapse in the structure, but deep down, I knew it wasn't. On the third night after finding it, I went back to the boarding house alone. My friend had stopped working there for the week, and I told myself I just wanted another look, maybe to prove I'd imagined it. But when I entered the hallway, the air was already colder. The panel I had opened before was gone. No seams, no hinges, nothing but smooth plaster. I ran my hand across it, and there was that tremor again, faint but steady like a pulse deep inside. The wall, and then the sound started. It came from the floorboards beneath my feet, a soft, rhythmic tapping, slow, deliberate, not random like footsteps or pipes, but patterned like breathing, only heavier. I knelt down, pressing my ear to the wooden froze, because I could hear something else too, whispering, faint, muffled like voices speaking just under the floor. I backed away, the boards creaked softly in reply. I didn't wait. I turned and left, but that night when I got home, the sound followed me. It started in the corner of my bedroom, soft at first like dripping water. I checked the ceiling, the pipes. Everything was dry. Still the sound continued, steady, deliberate. The next morning, I went back again, unable to stop myself. The hallway looked the same, but this time when I ran my hand along the wall, the panel opened on its own. No pressure, no force, just a quiet hiss of air. And there was the room, unchanged and waiting. I stepped inside, and the air thickened around me, sound distorted, every breath echoing too loudly. The whispering was stronger. Hear a low murmur coming from the walls. I pressed my hand against the surface, and the vibration pulsed in time with the sound. Then something shifted. Behind me, a faint scraping like nails dragging across the smooth floor. I turned, and the room was smaller now, the walls closer, the ceiling lower. It felt as if the space was folding in on itself, pulling tighter around me. I stumbled toward where the door had been, but it wasn't there, just more wall. The light flickered again, and in that brief darkness, something moved directly in front of me, tall and bent, its outline only half visible like a shadow that didn't belong to anything solid. I couldn't see its face, only the faint impression of hands, long fingers pressing against the curved surface from the inside, as if it were behind the wall, trying to push through. Then everything went still, the air emptied of sound, the cold thickened until it hurt, and the door reappeared. I fell through it, gasping for air, collapsing in the hallway. When I looked back, the room was gone. Once more, the panel sealed tight. That night, I dreamed again, the same walls, breathing, the same sound beneath the floor. Only this time, I wasn't standing in the room. I was inside, the wall pressed into it, unable to move, my mouth filled with dust, and my own heartbeat pounding against the cold, smooth surface. When I woke up, there were faint marks on my arms, thin and curved as if something had wrapped around me during the night, holding me still. And on the wall beside my bed, there was a single indentation, the faint outline of a hand pressing outward from the inside. After that first night, I tried to forget what I had seen inside that room, but it refused to leave me. Every sound in my apartment, every flicker of shadow on the wall made me think of those curved surfaces breathing in the dark. I told myself it was stress or imagination, but the unease grew heavier each day until it felt like the air itself carried it. 2 nights later, I woke up to the sound of creaking from the ceiling above my bed. Slow, methodical steps pacing back and forth. The boarding house had a similar old timber sound, but this was different. It was slower, too precise, every step sinking down, as if something was testing the weight of the air between us. I sat up in bed, listening, holding my breath. When the sound stopped, I thought it was over. Then the faintest sound reached me from the corner of the room, a single knock, soft and hollow, like something tapping from inside the wall. I didn't move for a long time. When I finally reached for the light switch, my fingers brushed the wall, and the surface wasn't flat. It bowed inward slightly, as though it had softened and given under my touch like warm wax. I jerked my hand away, but even in the dark, I could feel the faint vibration underneath the plaster, like before, steady, rhythmic, alive. I didn't go back to sleep. I waited for morning and went straight to the boarding house, as if going back there might prove to me that I wasn't losing my mind. When I reached the hallway, where the hidden panel had been, the air was different, colder, but clean like the smell After rain, I ran my hand along the wall, again expecting the same smooth plaster, but this time it gave way without resistance, sliding open into darkness like before inside the room. Everything was still yet alive in a way I can't explain. The light from my flashlight refused to rest on any single surface, bending slightly as if drawn away. I stepped inside, and the floor felt wrong soft, but not like rot, more like something underneath was shifting. When I crouched down and pressed my hand to it, I realized it was moving, not the surface itself, but something beneath it, rising and falling like the rhythm of slow breathing. Then I heard a faint noise from the far side of the room, a scraping like fingers dragging slowly across the wall. Following the curve, it circled the room once, then stopped behind me. I turned and saw something change. The surface bulged outward slightly from within, something pushing just beneath it like a shape pressing up against fabric, trying to break through. I stumbled backward and hit the opposite wall and felt it pulse under my hand just once, but strong enough that I knew there was something behind it, something large and shifting, quietly waiting. I backed away toward where the doorway had been, but there was only smooth walnut light, no exit. I pressed my hand against it and felt it warm slightly to my touch, almost responding. And then everything went dark, not the kind of dark you get when the lights go out. This was thicker, absolute. My flashlight sputtered once and died. I couldn't hear my own breathing, only that faint rhythmic sound from all around me, like the entire room was inhaling and exhaling slowly, pulling the air in and out through the wall. Something brushed against my shoulder, something cold and smooth. I turned and saw nothing, but in that darkness, I felt a presence leaning close enough to hear the whisper of movement, the dry rasp of something that had no lungs pretending to breathe. Then just as suddenly, the light came back. My flashlight flickered weakly, and the doorway was there again, open. I ran through it, not caring where it led, falling against the opposite wall in the hallway, gasping. The air outside the room was still cold, but it felt thin and hollow, like something inside that space had followed me out. I sealed the panel with wooden boards before I left, but that night when I got home, I found something waiting for me. The floor near my bed was swollen slightly, as if something underneath was pressing upward, the boards rising and falling with the same slow rhythm. And when I pressed my ear to the ground, I heard it again, breathing, steady, quiet, patient, just beneath the floor. For days, I tried to ignore the sound beneath the floor. It came and went like a slow heartbeat, always at night, sometimes faint, sometimes loud enough to rattle the glass on the bedside table. I slept with the lights on, but that only made things worse, because the light showed things the dark tried to hide. One night, when I couldn't take it anymore, I got up and tore back the old rug near my bed. The boards were warped in a way they hadn't been before, the pattern of the wood grain twisted in a strange loops, almost like fingerprints circling one another. I pressed my hand against it and felt warmth seeping through, as if the house itself was breathing under my palm. I went back to the boarding house the next morning, desperate for answers. The boards I had nailed over the hidden panel were gone, cleanly removed. No splinters, no damage, just gone. The hallway felt heavier this time, like the air was pressing in from all sides, and that faint vibration in the walls had spread further. I could feel it in the floor, the door frames, even the ceiling. When I reached the room, the panel opened by itself soundlessly, and the air that came out was freezing, but still somehow alive. My breath fogged instantly as I stepped inside, and the smell hit me like wet stone mixed with old metal. There were new marks along the walls, faint dark stains that shimmered slightly in the light, almost like something had seeped out from behind them. I noticed then that the wallpaper was peeling not from decay, but from pressure, like something was pushing out from beneath it. I moved closer and ran my fingers along one of the bulges and realized they weren't random shapes. They were outlines, human outlines, the faint suggestion of hands and faces pressing outward, straining against the paper. Thin layer that separated them from the room. I stumbled back, my stomach twisting as the light from my flashlight began to flicker again. The walls shifted under its beam, bending subtly as though adjusting themselves to my movement. The outlines moved too. I swear they did the shape of a head turned slightly following the direction of my light. Then came the sound, faint, at first like whispering, only this time it wasn't coming from under the floor, it was inside the walls, low murmurs overlapping. Impossible to make out, but growing louder the longer. I stayed until it sounded like hundreds of voices whispering through the thin skin of the room. I stepped back toward the door, but it had vanished again, seamless and perfect as before the whispering grew. Sharper now, like hissing, and then a sound like tearing cloth the wallpaper near the far wall, split open, a thin slit appearing in its surface, and from it a dark fluid began to seep out slow, and thick it ran down the curved wall, pooling at the base of the floor, spreading toward me. The room was changing, shrinking again, pulling inward like lungs exhaling. But the walls weren't just closing, and they were folding, bending around shapes that shouldn't have fit inside the space. I turned and pressed both hands against where the doorway should have been, but the surface pulsed under my palms, warm and slick. I could feel movement inside, something pressing back gently, as if curious. Then it whispered right beside my ear, a sound that wasn't a word, but still filled my head like a thought that didn't belong to me, a low tone that vibrated through my bones and made my vision blur. I dropped my flashlight, and when it hit the floor, the beam rolled across the space, catching something. In the corner, a single, pale hand emerging from the curve of the wall, fingers stretching slowly, then sliding back inside, as though the room had exhaled it. And just like that, the doorway reappeared, the air whooshing out of the room in one long breath. I stumbled out into the hallway and collapsed. The light from the other room seemed too bright, too sharp, as if the world outside was real again. When I finally got home that night, my walls were different. The wallpaper I'd had for years was starting to bubble and split in the corners, tiny cracks like something pressing out from behind. And as I sat in the dark, trying not to look at them, I realized the breathing beneath the floor had stopped. Now it was coming from the walls instead. By the time the breathing shifted from the floor to the walls, I knew something had followed me home. I stopped going to the boarding house for a while, but it didn't matter. That place wasn't contained anymore. Whatever lived inside that room with no corners had found a way out, or maybe it was never trapped to begin with. I tried pretending nothing had changed, but it showed itself in small ways. First, the mirror in my bathroom fogged on its own, even when there was no heat, no water running, and in the center of the fog would appear a faint impression, not of my reflection, but of another face slightly off from mine, its eyes darker, its mouth half open like it was mouthing something silent at night. The walls moved. When I wasn't looking, they didn't shift like in the old house, but they pulsed gently like skin when a heartbeat runs beneath it. I pressed my hand against them one evening, desperate to prove it to myself, and the warmth that came back wasn't from me. It was from something deeper, something breathing slow and patient on the other side. The first time I saw the face, it was subtle, a faint discoloration forming near the corner of my bedroom wall. The skin of the paint bubbled slightly, then sank. inward, creating the faint impression of a nose and lips. I told myself it was moisture, but every night it grew more detailed. By the third day, I could see the eyes' shallow indentations where the plaster had hollowed, and the eyes followed me. No matter where I stood, they tilted slightly, their shape changing as though something behind the wall was adjusting its position to watch me move. I left the apartment and stayed with a friend for 2 nights, but the same thing began happening in his place too. I woke in the middle of the night to find the wall beside the couch rippling faintly, and when I touched it, the vibration was back, steady, rhythmic, alive. I went back to the boarding house, determined to end it, to seal that cursed space for good. The hall was colder than I remembered, frost on the floor. Though it was the middle of summer, the panel was there again, waiting, slightly open, a soft draft pushing from the inside. I stood there for a long time listening, and realized the sound wasn't breathing anymore. It was murmuring like 100 voices just beyond the wall, repeating something over and over, too low to understand. I stepped closer and looked inside, and my breath caught, because the room wasn't empty anymore. The surfaces that had once been smooth now bulged, with shapes, the outlines of human forms half merged with the wall, shoulders, heads, arms twisting slightly beneath the surface, their faces distorted, stretched too thin, some frozen mid-scream, others silent, and still the walls rippled gently, as if they were breathing in unison. I wanted to run, but my feet wouldn't move. The air inside the room pulled at me gently like a tide of warmth spreading across my chest, a sensation not of fear, but of recognition. Like it knew me, like it had been waiting. I took a step forward, and the floor gave slightly under my weight. Not wood, not stone, something softer like the surface of skin. The faces moved as I did, their eyes turning, following my every motion until I reached the center of the room. Then everything stopped. The air froze, the vibration ceased, and the silence was so complete I could hear my own heartbeat echoing against the walls. Then one of the faces near me opened its mouth wide, impossibly wide, and a sound came out, a deep guttural exhale that wasn't quite human. The others followed one by one until the entire room was sighing in rhythm, the air pulsing with it. I stumbled back, covering my ears, but the sound wasn't in the air anymore. It was inside my head, filling every space in my skull like static behind my eyes. I saw flashes of things, not memories, but impressions, walls without corners, shifting endlessly, faces dissolving and reforming, voices whispering my name in tones that weren't speech, but pressure. Then the room exhaled once more, and I was thrown backward into the hall, gasping. The door sealing shut behind me, the sound inside cut off instantly, leaving nothing but silence. I ran. I don't remember how I got out, or how long I drove before realizing I had no destination. I only knew that the walls in that place had taken something from me. I could feel the emptiness inside my chest, as if a piece of me had been left there, pressed into the wall like all the others. When I returned home, the face in my bedroom wall was gone, replaced by a faint outline shaped exactly like mine. And that night, as I tried to sleep, I heard whispering from inside the plaster, not random words, but my own voice repeating the same thing again and again. Let me out. After that night, I knew it was over for me, but I didn't leave the apartment, not because I wanted to stay, but because the air outside felt wrong, too quiet, too still. It was like the silence that used to live inside the boarding house had spread out into the streets. I kept telling myself it was all in my head, that the face in the wall and the voices were some kind of breakdown, but denial doesn't stop walls from moving. On the third day, the breathing came back, not faint like before, but deep, steady, so loud it shook picture frames off the walls. The sound wasn't coming from one spot anymore. It came from everywhere above, below, all around, like the entire building was inhaling and exhaling my. Neighbors didn't notice, or maybe they did and couldn't admit it, because when I ran into one of them in the hallway, she looked at me too long, her eyes glazed like she was listening to something else that night. I dreamed of the room again, but this time I was looking at it from outside through a pane of glass. I could see myself standing in the middle of it, frozen, my head tilted slightly to one side, my skin pale, stretched tight, and the walls around me shifting like waves. I woke up gasping, but my reflection in the mirror didn't move for a moment. It just stared, eyes wide, unblinking, before catching up to me a second too late. I started hearing knocking after that, always in threes, slow, deliberate, from different spots. Every few hours it moved, from the kitchen to the bedroom to the living room, as if something inside the walls was mapping out the space, measuring where I was. The knocks got closer each night until they came from directly behind my bed. I moved the bed to the center of the room, thinking distance might matter, but the knocking just came from the floor, instead soft, hollow, like a hand pressing upward through the wood. I decided to leave. I packed what I could and drove all night, without a plan, just away. But no matter how far I went, the air didn't feel clean. Every motel room felt the same, the walls too smooth, too uniform, the corners not sharp enough. One night in a small town room, I noticed the wallpaper bulging near the dresser, faintly at first, then slowly forming the outline of a hand pressing outward. I left before dawn. I drove until the road blurred, then stopped at a diner, trying to convince myself to call someone. But who could I tell that a room without corners was following me, that the walls were alive? I went into the restroom to wash my face, and when I looked up, the mirror behind me was warped, the edges slightly curved, the reflection bending unnaturally, like the space around me was folding inward. I stared too long, and the mirror began to ripple, as if it were water behind my reflection. Something moved faintly, the outline of a room, curved and seamless, pale faces pressing close to the glass, their mouths open in silent exhale. I turned and ran, but as I left the bathroom, the hallway outside was different, longer, narrower, the corners fading into soft bends until there weren't any corners at all. It wasn't a hallway anymore. It was the room, the same room from the boarding house, but smaller, tighter, the air humming with that same slow rhythm. I dropped to the floor, clawing at where the door had been, but my hands sank into the wall like clay, and when I pulled them back, they were covered in a thin layer of dust that pulsed faintly, as if it were alive. The faces were closer, now pressing out from every side, their mouths opening and closing in sync, breathing with the room. The whispering began again, low, overlapping words that weren't in any language, but I understood them. They weren't asking, they were remembering me. The light dimmed until I couldn't tell if my eyes were open, and in that dark, the wall behind me shifted, something cold and soft wrapping gently around my shoulders, pulling me backward, the surface yielding like warm flesh. I struggled, but the harder I fought, the deeper I sank, until the wall closed over my chest, my arms, my face. It wasn't suffocating, it was quiet, warm. Still, the whispers became faint heartbeats, echoing through whatever I had become. I tried to scream, but there was no air, just the pulse of the wall and the slow vibration moving through me. Then it was still, I don't know how long passed before I woke up in my apartment again. Everything normal, sunlight pouring through the windows, dust floating in the air, the walls clean, smooth, calm, the breathing. Gone the silence, comforting, but when I looked down at the floor near my bed, I saw a faint pattern in the wood, the outline of a face, not deep, just a shallow impression of eyes and mouth, and a faint curve of a smile. And as I stared, the air inside the room changed. Slightly thicker, heavier, the edges of the walls seemed softer, less defined, and from deep inside the plaster came a single sound, one slow exhale like a sigh of relief, and then silence again waiting.